I'm just going to say it. The Canes were ahead of schedule this year. They made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They won a game in the Eastern Conference Finals. I understand the way the series went was a bummer, and especially those first 3 games, and I get it, but they weren't supposed to be here. This is the way I look at it. This is the way I believe the timeline went. Starting when Rod Brind'amour took over, right? So you're going back 7 seasons. There was an immediate build by any means necessary. Right? The timeline for then was you just have to get better. One foot in front of the other. From where they were starting, the mountaintop seemed so high. It was behind clouds. You didn't know how high it was. So it was just one step in front of the other. And they rushed that with some overachieving seasons, and they became crazy consistent. Starting about 3 or 4 years ago, I believe they started building towards last year. Right? Building towards the season that ended with the second-round loss to the Rangers. That was the all-in year. Thus, they made the move, right? Gensel at the deadline, right? They did some things that they weren't used to doing, and that was the year to go all in. Then they lost to the Rangers in the second round. And that's a big disappointment, right? That series loss, I don't think we were coming on the next day going like, what do you think? Was it good enough? No, we were disappointed with it. So, after building up to that season and underwhelming, I believe it's not like they set out to take a step back, but they recognized the roster was getting a little long in the tooth, the roster was getting a little expensive, and they had to reset some cap things, and they looked at some when deals were expiring, and they decided that maybe a step back for this year was their only way forward. And it really was the first time since Rod Brind'amour took over where the goal wasn't to be better than the year before, although that's always the goal. The kind of personnel decisions weren't always made with that in mind. So, coming into this year, step back, retool. They weren't jumping back. They weren't going back to the starting line. They weren't burning it down. It wasn't a knockdown rebuild. It was a step back and a retool, and they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals anyway. And I actually think they were building towards next year, because if you look at when some of their bigger expiring contracts were coming off, next year is the year that makes more sense. And because of that, I just this is back of the napkin math, right? This is not the most exciting stuff in the world. But I wanted to do a comparison between certain aspects of the Canes and certain aspects of the Florida Panthers after watching the series. I'm going to list for you just players in the core, not every player that's appeared, but just players in the core for the Carolina Hurricanes that are under the age of 26. Okay? These are, when I read these players, you're going to hear ones that played big roles in the postseason. 21-year-olds, Logan Stankoven, Jackson Blake. 22-year-olds, Scott Morrow, Seth Jarvis. 23-year-olds, Alexander Nikishin. 24-year-olds, Andrei Svechnikov. 25-year-olds, Pyotr Kochetkov. Those are all players that are under 26 years old. Aho, 27-year-old. Chatfield, 28 years old. Do you know how many players? Pretend I didn't say Aho Chatfield there. Do you know how many players, if you go to Pro Hockey Reference right now and you look up the Florida Panthers roster and you sort by age, do you know how many are under the age of 26?
Not many.
2.
Yeah, that's not many.
2. Tell me that, now that you're aware of that, tell me that series didn't look like a bunch of 28-plus-year-olds against a handful of 24, 22, 21-year-olds. And that's not to say that the 28-year-olds aren't also talented, but it's different. Anybody that, if you are right now listening to this and you are over the age of 28, think about yourself at 28 versus yourself at 21. You may have been like, you know what, I'm a little bit quicker at 21. My muscles recovered a little bit quicker at 21, although 28 is not exactly 50.
No, feeling pretty good then.
But just the knowledge, right? The big picture, you're better at life in a lot of ways with those 7-8 years of extra. The Panthers they've got some dudes that have lived some lives. You can't tell me. I mean, just we'll even knock it down, right? The Panthers had 2 players under 26. If we go just Canes under 23 or younger, Stankoven, Blake, Morrow, Jarvis, Nikishin, they played big roles in games 4 and games 5. So you don't depend on guys. At least coaches do everything they possibly can to depend on as few of those aged players as possible if you're going into a season where you're all in to win the cup. Right? If the expectation is sent from the ownership to the front office to the coaching staff that this is a year that is cup or bust, guess what the coach is saying? All right, well, we got to replace all these 22-year-olds because if you want me to deliver on what you're promising, like what you are asking, if you want me to deliver a cup, I mean, we might have 1 or 2 of these young guys who are wizened beyond their years, but we can't have, a third of our skaters 24 or younger. The jokes that have been made by Seth Jarvis in the last 48 hours, because everybody was being asked about the young guys, and Jarvis was in the veteran category being asked about Nikishin and Morrow and Stankoven. And the young guys and the jokes, Jarvis is going, what do you guys think I am, 40? Nikishin's older than I am. Like, those jokes are only funny because they're true. Seth Jarvis, Svetch, Aho, these are the vets in a lot of ways. Now, they have legit vets, don't get me wrong. It's not like Stahl doesn't exist. But you're looking to Jarvis. I'm like, what are you doing to help out these young guys? And he's going, the young guy is half a year older than I am. It happens in sports where when you collect a nice group of young talent and they play, they might have to take some lumps. They might have to get beat up by a team like the Florida Panthers. But if you learn the lessons that you're supposed to learn the hard way, you come back the next year with a little bit more understanding of what it's going to be like and a little bit more connection and a little bit more comfort and a little bit more, and you do it again and you do it again until eventually you're playing another team and you're all 28 and they've got a bunch of young guys and you're teaching them the lessons.
That's the thing about the Florida roster. When you talk about those guys like Barkov, Forsling, and some of these other guys, Bennett, those guys have been through it already, and they grew together. Think about 4 years ago, they were the President's Cup champions. This is before they actually got Paul Maurice and they decided to trade for Matthew Tkachuk. They actually altered some of their core, but Barkov and some of these other guys were part of that team. And other guys that they brought in, like Seth Jones, he's 30 years old, going through all the stuff that he's been through in his career to get to this point and learning how to win. That's what this Florida team has done. And you mentioned all the young guys for Carolina. They're going through that process right now that Florida was going through 4 years ago.
There's some lessons that the Florida Panthers, with their play, taught some of the young guys for the Canes this past 2 weeks that they learned the hard way from the Tampa Bay Lightning, right? And that's the cycle. That's the cycle. That's why, like, you could have, I don't know if it would have been ideal, but you could have thrown like Stillman or Jost or whatever in there and just figured, the young guys need their confidence. No, you throw Morrow out there and you go, well, you're going to play 8 minutes and your head's going to be spinning and it's not going to be fun for you at times. But gosh darn it, remember how it felt.
So you're going to look at him and say, you're about to grow up.
Yeah.
Time to grow up, kid. You got to grow up fast. Time to grow up.
So like the Canes getting here early, right? If you believe, like I believe, that they built towards last year and then maybe took a step back for a retool and were building towards next year, and this was the limbo year, if you believe that, which I do, it's the best kind of limbo year. Because you got the Florida Panthers in the Eastern Conference Finals to hammer home a lot of things that you needed to learn. So, again, am I going to sit here and say, it's great that these guys struggled? No. Am I going to sit here and pretend that Slavin had to learn hard lessons? No. right? Slave and Walker Carrier, they're 30, right? They're not even the oldest people in the world, so they can be a little bit older when these guys, like there's a nice crop that's going to age well for the Carolina Hurricanes in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Now you know the Martinooks and the Stahl they're going to be holding on, but there's a lot of guys that are going to be pretty darn impressive. And if you supplement appropriately through free agency, through trades, and right, like let's be real, the Panthers learned their lessons from the Lightning, and then they trade for Matthew Tkachuk. That's that's a nice little like boost. There might be that move for the Canes where you got to go get a dude, but I don't think there's anyone in that series 25 years and younger that doesn't leave a much more prepared player for next year.